The first sound was boots on dry boards, slow, heavy. The girl knew that sound. It was the sound of a man who owned the ground he walked on. She stood on the porch, barefoot, the rough wood cold against her skin. The dawn was a pale wash of grey, not yet strong enough to burn off the chill. Behind her, the ranch house was a dark shape against the sky. And inside that house, her mama lay crumpled against a wall, the baby still clutched in her arms. Her face was the color of ash. The man stepped out of the gloom, broad shoulders, hat pulled low. He wasn't walking toward the house, he was circling it. He stopped dead when he saw them, froze like a man who'd just seen a ghost walk out of a grave. His eyes didn't go to the girl or her mama. They locked onto the tiny bundle wrapped in rags. The baby. Then his gaze lifted, first to the still woman on the floor and last to the girl, Hattie, staring back at him, chin up, just like her mama taught her. "Mama's sleeping," Hattie said, her voice a tiny thing in the vast quiet. "The baby, too. We didn't knock. Last time we knocked, they heard us." The man's face was a mask, but something flickered in his eyes. He heard every word. He reached up, pushed his hat back. He had the kind of eyes that saw everything you were trying to hide. He crouched down, slow, bringing himself level with her. His voice was rough, like stones rolling in a creek bed. "Easy now, ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She didn't believe him, not yet. She'd heard promises before. "Your mama," he said, glancing past her. "She need a doctor." Hattie swallowed. She nodded. "The baby came last night. There was blood. Mama kept talking strange, then she just went quiet." The man let out a breath, slow and careful. He moved past her, his boots gentle now on the boards. He knelt beside the woman, his large, calloused fingers searching for a pulse at her throat. The baby let out a thin, weak cry that sliced right through the morning air. "She's alive," the man murmured. "Weak, but alive." He looked back at Hattie. "What's your name, girl?" "Hattie." "Well, Hattie," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Wyatt. I'm going to carry your mama inside, put her somewhere safe. You follow right behind me with the little one. You think you can do that?" She gave one sharp nod. He gathered her mama into his arms like she weighed no more than a sack of flour. Hattie watched, her eyes wide, as he carried her through the doorway into the dark, quiet house. It smelled of old wood smoke and stale coffee. He laid her on a narrow bed, pulling a quilt over her frail body. "Put him here," Wyatt said, pointing to a chair where he'd laid a folded blanket. "Keep him warm." He worked with a quiet efficiency that was almost frightening. He pumped water, heated it, bathed her mama's forehead. He cut a thick slice of bread and put it on the table. "Eat," he said. It wasn't a request. Hattie ate, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. Outside, a horse stamped and snorted. Wyatt stared out the window, his jaw tight. He was making a decision: ride for help or stay and guard this fragile peace. He turned back, and his eyes fell on Hattie, watching him with a desperate trust that felt heavier than stone. He nodded once, to himself. "I need to ride for town," he said, reaching for his coat. "But first—" The wind rattled the window pane. Hattie shivered, pulling the baby closer. Wyatt's gaze drifted to the newborn. He let himself truly look at the child for the first time, and he froze. His breath hitched in his chest. His face went pale under his tan. It wasn't just surprise, it was shock. The kind of shock that hits a man when he sees something he knows is impossible. He knew that baby. Or rather, he knew who that baby looked like. The cabin held its breath. Hattie watched him, her small hands clutching the swaddled infant. Every sound in the room was suddenly loud. The pop of the fire, the drip of water from the cloth he'd used on her mama's face, the harsh rasp of his own breathing. He didn't move for a long time, just stared. Stared at the baby's tiny, sleeping face. Finally, he knelt by the bed again, his movements stiff. He pressed the damp cloth to the woman's forehead. She stirred, her lips parting, but no sound came out. "Her skin's hot," Hattie whispered, creeping closer. "Fever," Wyatt said, his voice clipped. He didn't look at her. "It'll take her if we don't break it." He moved to a shelf, grabbed a dusty jar, and shook a pinch of dried willow bark into a cup. He poured boiling water over it. the sharp, earthy smell filling the room. He seemed to be moving on instinct, his mind somewhere else entirely. "We was on the road," Hattie said, her voice cracking. "Mama kept walking till she fell." Wyatt didn't respond. He was 1,000 miles away. When the tea cooled, he handed the cup to her. "When she wakes, get some of this into her." He set about his tasks again, but there was a new tension in him, a coiled spring of violence just beneath the surface. He checked the fire, wiped the woman's face, set out another piece of bread. But his eyes kept flicking back to the baby. Hattie noticed the way he looked at her little brother wasn't kind or curious. It was calculating. "Is this your house?" she asked, trying to break the strange silence. He glanced up. "Yes." "Just you?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Just me." Hattie's eyes scanned the room. One bed, one chair, one set of worn tools on the wall. It was a lonely place, a place that had been empty for a long, long time. "Where's your family?" she asked quietly. He turned his back to her, resting a hand on the cool metal of the stove. "Gone," he said. The word was flat. Final. It was a door slamming shut. The baby whimpered. Hattie rocked him gently, humming a tune her mama used to sing. When she looked up, Wyatt was watching them. His expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions hidden behind a stone wall. "You know how to handle him," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mama taught me," she said, lifting her chin. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, as if that confirmed something for him. He turned back to the bed. The woman's breathing seemed a little easier. Some color had returned to her cheeks. "Good," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. The quiet returned, but it was different now. It was heavy with unspoken questions. The air was thick with things Wyatt wasn't saying. Then the woman's eyes fluttered open. "Mama!" Hattie was at her side in an instant. "We're safe. He brought us inside." The woman's gaze was sluggish, confused. It moved from Hattie's face to the man standing like a sentinel by the fire. Her lips parted. "Who?" "Name's Wyatt," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You're on my land, ma'am. You're welcome here till you're strong." Relief washed over the woman's face. She saw Hattie, holding the baby, and a weak smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she breathed. Wyatt just gave a short nod. He spoon-fed her some of the willow-bark tea, his large hand surprisingly gentle. Hattie watched him, a knot of confusion in her stomach. He was being kind. He was helping them. But that look he'd given the baby, it felt like danger. When her mama drifted back to sleep, Wyatt straightened up and grabbed his coat and his hat. "Where are you going?" Hattie asked, her voice sharp with fear. "Town," he said. He didn't look at her. He was checking the bullets in the revolver at his hip, the motion practiced and deadly. "Doctor, supplies." "They won't help us," Hattie whispered. "They never do." "I ain't asking for help," Wyatt said, his voice flat and cold. "I'm getting what I need." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the latch. He looked back at the three of them, a broken woman, a scared child, and a newborn baby. His face was a hard mask, but for a second Hattie saw a flicker of something else, something that looked a lot like pain. "Lock this door behind me," he ordered. "Don't open it for anyone, not till you hear my voice. Understand?" Hattie nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs. He stepped outside, pulling his hat low. The sound of his boots faded, followed by the thunder of a horse's hooves galloping away, fast. Too fast for a simple ride to town. He wasn't just going for a doctor, he was riding to war. Wyatt didn't ride into town, he rode around it, approaching from the west, where the hills gave him a clear view of the single dusty street. He wasn't looking for the doctor's office, he was looking for a specific horse. A big bay stallion with a white blaze. He found it tied outside the saloon. He dismounted, leaving his own horse in a thicket of scrub oak. He moved with a predator's silence, sticking to the shadows behind the buildings. The town was quiet, but it was a waiting kind of quiet. The air was thick with tension. He slipped into the alley beside the mercantile. The storekeeper was sweeping the porch, a thin man named Silas who saw more than he ever spoke about. Wyatt whistled, a low two-toned sound. Silas froze. He glanced around, his eyes wide with fear. He saw Wyatt in the shadows and scurried back inside his store. A moment later, the back door creaked open. "You shouldn't be here, Wyatt," Silas whispered, wringing his hands. "He's in town, the judge." "I know," Wyatt said, his voice a low growl. "Is his boy with him?" "No, not today. Just him and a few of his men. They were in here earlier, asking questions, about a woman, a girl with dark hair." Wyatt's jaw clenched. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, I swear it, Wyatt. I said I hadn't seen anyone." Silas was sweating, his eyes darting back toward the street. "But they know she came this way. They've been riding the lines all morning." Wyatt nodded. He'd seen the tracks. That's how he knew. "I need supplies, Silas. Flour, coffee, and milk. The kind for a baby." Silas's eyes went wide. "A baby? Lord have mercy, Wyatt. It's true then." "Just get it," Wyatt snapped. "Leave it by the old well after sundown. I'll leave the coin." He melted back into the shadows before Silas could say another word. He didn't go to the doctor. The doctor was a good man, but he was also a man who could be pressured. Wyatt couldn't risk it. He made his way to the edge of town, to the small, run-down church. The preacher was outside, tending a small patch of wilting roses. "Afternoon, preacher," Wyatt said, his voice quiet. The preacher looked up, his face grim. "I heard you had visitors, Wyatt. You hear a lot of things. I also heard Judge Blackwood is in town, looking for what he calls his stolen property." The preacher met Wyatt's gaze. "A man reaps what he sows, son. But sometimes the harvest is bitter for everyone, innocent or not. I'm not looking for a sermon, preacher, just a question. Is Sheriff Miller on the judge's payroll these days?" The preacher sighed, snipping a dead rose from its stem. "The sheriff is more practical. He knows where the power in this county lies." That was all Wyatt needed to know. He was on his own. As he turned to leave, he saw them, 3 men stepping out of the saloon. One of them was a big, ugly man with a scarred face. He was one of Blackwood's top hands. They saw Wyatt, and they smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Wyatt didn't run. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the thicket where he'd left his horse. He could feel their eyes on his back. He heard their boots crunching on the dusty ground behind him. They were following him. He reached his horse, swung himself into the saddle. He didn't look back. He just urged the horse into a steady walk, heading back the way he came. He knew they wouldn't make a move here, so close to town. But out on the open plains, there were no witnesses. He rode for an hour, the sun beating down on his back. He could still feel them behind him, keeping their distance, but always there. A constant, menacing presence. Finally, he reached a narrow canyon, a perfect place for an ambush. He pulled his horse to a stop. He dismounted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. He waited. The 3 riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon. They saw him waiting, and they fanned out, their hands hovering over their pistols. "Nowhere left to run, Kane," the scarred man called out, using Wyatt's old name, a name no one had used in 10 years. "The judge wants his property back, the woman, and the boy." "She's not property," Wyatt said, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, "and you're not taking her." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You always did have a soft spot for strays. Look where it got your wife, where it got your own boy." A red haze filled Wyatt's vision. He raised the rifle to his shoulder. "This ain't about her," Wyatt said, his voice dangerously low. "This is about what you and the judge did to me, to my family." The scarred man's smile faded. He finally understood. This wasn't about a random woman Wyatt had found on his porch. This was about a decade of buried hatred, a debt of blood that was about to be paid in full. "You should have stayed gone, Kane," the man snarled, his hand dropping to his gun. "I came back to finish it," Wyatt said. And then the canyon exploded with the sound of gunfire. The gunfire echoed and died, leaving a ringing silence in the canyon. 3 men lay still in the dust. Wyatt stood over them, his rifle smoking, his face a grim mask. He hadn't wanted this, but they had left him no choice. They had brought the past to his door. He rode back to the cabin under the cold light of the moon, the new supplies tied behind his saddle. He didn't feel like a victor. He just felt tired. Tired and old. The door was barred, just as he'd told her. He knocked once, low and soft. "Say your name." Hattie's small voice came from inside. "It's me, Hattie. It's Wyatt." The bolt slid back. The door opened. Hattie's face was pale in the lamplight, her eyes huge with fear. Relief washed over her when she saw him. The cabin was warm. A soup was simmering on the stove. The baby was sleeping peacefully. The woman, he had to stop thinking of her as the woman, was sitting up in bed, her eyes clear and sharp. She knew. Somehow she knew something had happened. "You came back," she said softly. "Told you I would," he said, setting the parcels on the table. He pulled out the tinned milk, the soft cotton cloth. Her eyes widened. "The town," she began. "I didn't go into town," he said, cutting her off, "and the doctor's not coming." Fear flickered in her eyes. "Why not?" Wyatt pulled up a chair and sat down, his movements heavy. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, but also a core of steel that reminded him of someone he had lost long ago. "Because Judge Blackwood is in town," he said. "He and his men are looking for you." All the color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth. How do you know that name?" "Because I know him," Wyatt said, his voice low and hard. "And he knows me." He leaned forward, his eyes burning into hers. "And because I know that baby in the cradle isn't just any baby. He's got the judge's eyes. He's the spitting image of his son, Thomas Blackwood." She flinched as if he had struck her. The truth was out, lying bare and ugly between them. "Your story about being a housemaid," Wyatt continued, his voice relentless. "It wasn't the whole truth, was it? You weren't just a housemaid. You were Thomas Blackwood's secret. And when you got pregnant, the judge couldn't have that scandal sullying his family name." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't deny it. She just nodded, her body shaking with silent sobs. "They sent me away," she whispered. "Gave me a little money and told me to disappear. But Thomas, he said he would come for me. He said he loved me. I waited. But he never came. The money ran out. We had nowhere to go." "He was never going to come for you," Wyatt said, his voice flat. "The judge owns him, body and soul. The only reason they're hunting you now is because Thomas died a month ago. A riding accident. That makes this baby here," he gestured to the cradle, "the judge's only grandchild, his only heir." The full, horrifying truth dawned on her face. "He doesn't want me," she breathed. "He just wants my son." "He wants the boy," Wyatt confirmed, "and he wants to erase you, the loose end." Hattie, who had been listening from the shadows, let out a small gasp. She crept to her mother's side, her small arms wrapping around her. The cabin was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the woman's ragged breathing. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Wyatt leaned back in his chair, the firelight catching the old scars on his hands. "My name isn't Wyatt," he said softly. "It's Kane. 10 years ago, I owned the biggest ranch in this valley. I had a wife, Sarah, and a son, just a little older than your Hattie." He stared into the flames, his eyes seeing a past that was more real than the room around him. "Judge Blackwood wanted my land. He wanted the water rights. He tried to buy me out, but I wouldn't sell. So he found another way. He started a rumor. Spread lies about my wife. Said she wasn't fit for his decent town. He turned everyone against us. One night a mob came, men with torches and ropes. The sheriff just stood by and watched. His voice was hollow, stripped of all emotion. They burned my home to the ground. We got out, but my boy. He breathed in too much smoke. He was never strong after that. We were on the road just like you. No one would help us. The fever took him a few weeks later. My Sarah, she just gave up, wasted away. I buried them both on a nameless hill." He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a decade of cold, burning rage. "I came back here 3 years ago, took a new name, bought this small, forgotten patch of land. I was waiting for a chance. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew one day the Lord would deliver Judge Blackwood into my hands." He looked from the crying woman to the sleeping baby. "Then you showed up on my porch, and you didn't just bring me a chance for redemption." He stood up, his shadow looming large on the wall. "You brought me my revenge." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold as iron. She wasn't a stranger he was helping out of the goodness of his heart. She was a weapon, and he intended to use her. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the cabin, a lonely, mournful sound. It sounded like a warning. The night was a tense, waiting silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind sounded like approaching doom. Wyatt didn't sleep. He sat by the window, his rifle across his lap, watching the moonlit plains. The woman, Eleanor, held her son, rocking him gently, her eyes wide and fearful. Hattie was asleep by the fire, but it was a restless, troubled sleep. They were no longer just strangers taking shelter. They were prisoners of a war they hadn't known existed. "They'll come back," Eleanor whispered into the darkness. "The judge won't stop." "I know," Wyatt said without turning. "But they won't be expecting what's waiting for them." He had spent the last 3 years preparing for this. The cabin wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. The windows had steel bars he could slide into place. The door was reinforced with an iron plate. He had caches of ammunition hidden beneath the floorboards. He hadn't just been waiting, he had been planning. Dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. With the light came the riders, not 3 this time, a dozen. With the judge himself at their head, a grim, dark figure on a black horse. They didn't ride up to the cabin. They fanned out, surrounding it, their rifles gleaming in the morning sun. "Kane!" The judge's voice boomed across the yard. "I know you're in there. I know what you did to my men. You have something that belongs to me. Send out the woman and the boy, and I'll let you live." Wyatt didn't answer. He slid the steel bars across the windows, plunging the cabin into semi-darkness. "Hattie," he said, his voice calm and steady, "get the water buckets, put them by the door. Eleanor, you keep that baby low, in the corner, behind the stove." He moved with a deadly purpose, checking his rifle, laying out extra ammunition on the table. "He'll kill us all," Eleanor sobbed, clutching the baby to her chest. "He'll kill you and the boy no matter what," Wyatt said, his voice hard. "Your only chance is with me. You need to be strong now, not for you, for them." He nodded toward Hattie, who was bravely hauling a bucket of water, her small face set with determination. The first shot shattered a window pane, sending glass skittering across the floor. The siege had begun. For hours, the cabin was a hell of noise and smoke. Bullets splintered the walls. The air grew thick with the smell of gunpowder. Wyatt moved from window to window, a phantom in the gloom, firing with deadly accuracy. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was the soldier he had been long ago, before he had met Sarah, before he had tried to build a peaceful life. The judge's men tried to rush the door, using a heavy log as a battering ram. The iron plate held. Wyatt fired through a slit in the door, and the men fell back, dragging their wounded. They tried to set fire to the roof. Hattie, without being told, scrambled onto a chair and threw buckets of water onto the smoldering shingles, her face streaked with soot. Eleanor, seeing the girl's courage, found her own. She tore strips from her dress to serve as bandages. She reloaded the second rifle, her hands shaking at first, then becoming steady, her movements quick and sure. They weren't a victim and her children anymore. They were a fighting unit, a family forged in the crucible of a siege. Hours bled into a long, bloody afternoon. The attacks became more desperate, more reckless. Wyatt took a bullet in the arm, a hot, searing pain, but he barely flinched. He just ripped a piece of his shirt, had Eleanor tie it tight, and kept firing. Finally, as the sun began to sink, there was a lull. "They're falling back," Eleanor breathed, peering through a crack in the shutters. "No," Wyatt said, his voice grim. "They're getting ready for the last push. They'll try to burn us out for good after dark." He looked at their dwindling supply of ammunition, at the small pile of spent cartridges on the floor. "We can't win a war of attrition." "So what do we do?" she asked, her eyes finding his in the dim light. "I'm going to end it," he said. He looked at her, at Hattie, at the sleeping baby who had miraculously slept through most of the chaos. He saw the ghosts of his own family in their faces. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about them, about giving them the chance his own family never had. "When I open that door," he said, his voice low and urgent, "it's going to draw their fire. That's your chance. Take the children. There's a dry creek bed behind the barn. Follow it north. Don't stop running until you hit the river. Don't look back. No matter what you hear, do you understand me?" Tears streamed down her face. "You're not coming with us." It wasn't a question. He gave her a sad, grim smile. "I told you I buried my family once. I won't do it again. My fight ends here. Yours is just beginning." He pressed his spare revolver into her hand. "For Hattie. When she's old enough." He crouched down in front of the little girl. "You're the bravest girl I've ever known, Hattie. You protect your mama and your brother." He stood up, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. He looked back at them one last time, memorizing their faces. Then he kicked open the door and charged out into the dying light, firing his rifle, a battle cry of pure, raw fury ripping from his throat. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She grabbed the baby, took Hattie's hand, and scrambled out the back window. Gunfire erupted from all sides, all of it focused on the lone figure in front of the cabin. She ran, half sobbing, dragging Hattie behind her, plunging into the shadows of the barn. She didn't look back. She kept her promise. The sound of the gunfight faded behind them as they scrambled down into the creek bed, replaced by the sound of her own harsh breathing and the pounding of her heart. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, until the moon was high in the sky, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets and the gurgle of the distant river. The next morning, the sun rose on a quiet, smoking ruin. The yard was littered with the bodies of the judge's men. Near the porch steps lay Judge Blackwood himself, a look of shocked disbelief frozen on his face, and leaning against the bullet-riddled doorframe, his rifle still clutched in his hands, was Wyatt, or Kane. He was still, his eyes closed, a faint, peaceful smile on his lips. He had paid his debt. He had finished it. Miles away, a woman and 2 children watched the sunrise from the banks of a wide river. They were alone, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a heavy revolver wrapped in cloth. But they were alive, and they were free. The woman looked at her son, then at the fierce, determined girl standing beside her. They had survived, and in a world that had tried to erase them sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. If you were moved by this story of survival and sacrifice, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.